Well, hello there, and welcome along to another edition of the Etch Play weekly live show. I am your host this week. My name is Adam Burt, and it is my pleasure to be your guide to another wonderful week in the world of video games. We've got lots of things to talk about this week, and I've been joined by the brilliant Dan Thomas. Dan, how's it going?
I'm good, Adam. I hope we are recording this because I need to capture that moment of you referring to me as brilliant.
Yeah, he's going to be
Thank you.
posting that on Twitter every day from now until the end of time. But I mean it. We are here, as ever, every week to talk about the latest things that are happening in games, talk about the latest news from the games industry, but also to show off some gameplay of games that we find interesting and to have a chat about games marketing as well. Those are the three pillars of our show. And we're going to start with the news in just a second. Today's gameplay segment is Backpack Hero, which is a little inventory management roguelike being played by Tyre on the show shortly. And later on, we're talking about leaks. You might be able to guess why, based on our first news story in just a second. But we'll be talking about the impact that leaks can have on your marketing and how you kind of handle it, I guess, when it happens. Because obviously, it's not usually part of the plan, although we'll talk about that as well, and all sorts of kind of, I guess, angles, viewpoints, things to consider when it comes to video game leaks and leaking. Dan, are you ready to get started?
Let's do it.
Cool, okay, then give me just a second and I will reveal footage of Grand Theft Auto. Allow me to stress straight away, this is not the leaked footage of Grand Theft Auto 6, which you might expect it to be. We're not going to show that. Obviously, it's out there on the internet. You can find it if you care enough, but it was obtained through illegal means, so it's not our bag. And it's the
I like
biggest
how you
story
set
of
that
this
up,
week.
though. You set people up there. You gave the impression, and then you took it away.
Yeah.
I mean, this could
maybe
work.
look like this. GTA 6 probably looks a lot like GTA 5, but a little bit nicer. So yeah, this is the biggest story of this week. It's the hack of Rockstar Games. There is 90 minutes of video footage of Grand Theft Auto 6 leaked onto the internet, and it's the first look anybody outside the studio has had of this much anticipated upcoming game, which we think is still likely several years away from release. The hacker in question who obtained this footage has threatened to release more, including the source code for GTA 5 and 6, as well as a test build of GTA 6. Rockstar have acknowledged this, and they've called it a network intrusion in a public statement, and assured fans that it won't cause delays. Historically, of course, leaks of game data have caused dev slowdowns for a variety of companies because they have to investigate how it happened, tighten up security so it doesn't happen again, and depending on what leaked, sometimes they have to rework large parts of the game's code to protect against cheats and hacks on the released product when it eventually comes out. So the biggest threat here really is that source code. If that gets leaked, that would be problematic for any developer, and Rockstar would be, they would have to deal with that in one way or another. But the gameplay that we have seen looks familiar to past GTA games, but features two playable protagonists, one female and one male, and it seems to be incorporating some of the kind of depth that Rockstar's other big game, Red Dead Redemption 2, managed to offer in the Western genre in 2018. Internet reaction's been a little bit strange to this. This early footage doesn't look shiny and finished because it isn't finished. But a lot of the kind of fans, or so-called fans, shall we say, still felt the need to be really critical about this footage, say that it looks bad, say that they're not happy with the graphical quality of a work in progress. Really just a kind of unusual feedback to give, I guess. We'll talk about this as well later on, but tied to that naivety, I guess, about how games are actually made. Uber, the taxi app that you might be familiar with, have reached out to the FBI about this hack because they also suffered a hack around the same time. There's an implication here that they believe that the same person or group hacked both companies in quick succession. Dan, what do you make of this news story?
I mean, it's got people talking, hasn't it?
Yeah,
lots to unpack. So we'll discuss more later on. But yeah, it's definitely sending a bit of a shockwave through, I guess, like not even just the games industry, wider entertainment, like you say, kind of FBI involvement all across startups and everything else. So yeah, this is definitely going to be something that people are going to be talking about for a long time, I'm sure.
Yeah, and as we said, game's still quite far from release. We do think that no matter what happens, this game's going to be one of the biggest games in the world. It's going to sell very well. So it's not the end of the world for Rockstar, I don't think. But obviously they would rather this didn't happen. And we will be talking about it more later as well, so we're going to move on. Our next news story is about Sony, and actually this is, file this one under stories that probably won't surprise anyone. I think we all knew this was coming. The PSVR 2 won't be backwards compatible with PSVR 1 games. The technology differences between the two platforms are so significant that they can't be made to work the same way. It's just too much effort, too expensive. The payoff here, of course, is that hopefully it means that the PSVR 2 is going to take full advantage of some cutting-edge technology, rather than being, I guess, in some way held back by needing to work in a similar way to the old stuff. Some of the more popular games will reportedly receive ports to the new system, so you might still be able to, keep some of those games potentially. You might be entitled to a free port. That might be something that some studios do. But obviously, that's all kind of up to the publishers themselves as to whether they want to do that. And that's kind of an interesting development for PSVR 2 and any VR fans out there, especially in the console space. Elsewhere at Sony, while we're on hardware news from them, rumours are suggesting that a major revision of the PlayStation 5 is coming, and it will have a detachable disc drive. It's unclear whether this will just be called the PS5 and directly replace the models that are on store shelves now, or theoretically on store shelves now, they're not actually there, or if it will have a new name and be sold alongside the existing models. So is it going to be PS5 Pro or PS5 disc flexibility model, or whatever they end up calling it? Some people, I thought this was an interesting little conspiracy theory on the internet, and I thought I'd just repeat it verbatim on our live show. But some people are wondering whether this move from Sony might be related to the kind of increasing scrutiny around the world about video game company revenues and pricing. For one example, we recently talked on the show about a lawsuit here in the UK about the control that Sony has over PlayStation's digital sales. So the suggestion here is that maybe Sony really wants to sell less disc-based games, tongue twister, and have everything bought through the digital store, which would mean they could set the prices, eliminate resales, which earn them no revenue, and basically fix all the prices with no competition. But if they eliminate the disk drive completely, it would be harder for Sony to argue to governments and regulators around the world that they don't have total control over game sales. So making it optional as an extra that you can buy separately maybe gives them the flexibility to pretty much ensure that as many games as possible are bought digitally, but technically the disc option is still available for those that want it, so you technically have a choice in the marketplace. That is, of course, just a theory. No one from Sony has said that. They wouldn't say that publicly if that was true. But it's an interesting move. Remind you of the HD DVD player for the Xbox 360, Dan?
Yeah, it does. That is an interesting conspiracy theory. I think, from my perspective, the PSVR 2 news is more interesting as a topic in general. Obviously, there's not anything, like I say, groundbreaking, but it's still making headlines and being talked about, and kind of they're working on the hype cycle for that, which I'm looking forward to. I think the PSVR original headset was quite significant in that era of VR adoption, and I have high hopes that the PSVR 2 is going to do a repeat performance of that, if not, take things even further. VR has kind of had a wobbly old ride over the years. It's still around. It's maybe not quite as headline dominating as it was a few years ago. So it'd be nice to see that come back. As with, like the competition piece, or the fixed pricing thing. I mean, yeah, absolutely. If you can only get games through the digital store, they do have complete control. I'd argue maybe the retail sort of component isn't that impactful on price setting. That's obviously coming from the price of an equivalent Xbox game is going to have far more significance than the retail side of things. But it is still a significant proportion of game sales. So interesting theory somebody's had, and I'm sure these are the conversations that are being had and deliberated at Sony headquarters.
Yep. Long Steve in the chat says, new PS5, be nice if it was smaller and flatter. I agree. Too many curves in the current one, he says. It doesn't stack well. Yeah, we talked about the design of the PlayStation 5 a lot, and I think there was a suggestion that it might grow on some of us, and I don't think it has grown on most of us. I think it's still ugly. So this could be a real chance for them to launch a nicer looking model, to be frank. because the disk drive is a significant bulge, obviously, on the disk-based model. He also says interesting ideas in the PSVR 2, including the haptic feedback from the PlayStation 5 gamepad and having it in VR can only be great. That is also a very, very good point. It sounds like with the PlayStation VR 1, they were kind of similar to the PlayStation 3, architecturally doing a lot of their own things, rather than maybe adhering to the standards that have been set by Oculus and other competitors that are out there. And I think now that the market is stabilised a little bit, I think there's going to be, or at least there's a suggestion from Sony that the new one is going to be a lot more developer friendly. So that will also be interesting to see. Hopefully we'll see more console games taking advantage of virtual reality. Our last news story then is all about Twitch. And this is about them changing their stance on gambling. So following an outcry over a scam involving a prominent streamer, Twitch is going to be changing its rules about gambling content next month. These changes come into effect. It was announced via Twitter with wording that gambling has been a big topic of discussion, according to the post. The recent scandal, by the way, involved Slyker, who borrowed at least $200,000 in order to fund his gambling addiction. The site's policy already bans the sharing of links or referral codes to any websites featuring slots, roulette, or dice games, but Twitch's statement acknowledges that some people have been able to circumvent those rules and, in their words, expose our community to potential harm. So this new policy comes into effect on October 18th and will prohibit users from streaming footage of websites, which is key, that include slots, roulettes, or dice games that aren't licensed in the US or other jurisdictions that provide sufficient consumer protection. There is a list in there of websites which are definitely banned, and Twitch says it may identify others as we move forward. One little strange wrinkle in this, at least strange from my perspective, I guess we'll talk about it in just a second to get Dan's view on it. Websites focused on sports betting, fantasy sports, and poker will still be allowed, which to me seems like it's maybe not solving the core problem of reducing, exposure to gambling on Twitch. Poker and sports betting, arguably two of the most popular kinds of gambling. If those are still allowed, regardless of their licensing arrangements, that would seem strange. But I guess there's some difficulty here, isn't there, for Twitch in terms of deciding what a game is and when it becomes gambling. Because you can have a poker-based video game that no money is being bet on. Should that be allowed? And Dan, I'm interested to get your thoughts about this. What do you make of Twitch's latest changes?
Yeah, I mean, good that they are limiting exposure of such things, but as you say, where is the, I'm glad I don't have to decide, and I know this is a conversation that's happening a lot throughout the industry and regulatory authorities, like what is gambling, because you've got the whole loot box situation, and are they going to ban somebody playing FIFA Ultimate Team and opening packs and those kinds of things, Rocket League, or any of these kind of loot box mechanics, which it would be nice if there was a clear line in the sand for some to say this is and this isn't, but obviously that's not the case. I'm glad I don't have to make that decision. I guess, when things get questionable like that, I would prefer everybody erred on the side of caution and didn't expose anybody who's going to be influenced, but especially young audiences and things like that. But it does detract from the motion that they're making. But equally, I do understand there is a fuzzy grey line.
I think a lot of people have seen this as, or reported on it as if it's Twitch banning gambling outright, which it definitely isn't, because licensed websites will still be allowed, so you'll still be able to see slots and roulette and dice games on the site. It's really the unlicensed ones, or the ones that are maybe a little bit shadier, that are going to be banned, which obviously doesn't go that far, because I imagine most people are playing on licensed websites. The exclusion of poker in particular, I find very odd.
It does.
Surely there's a line there just about, are you betting on it? Yes or no? Is real money changing hands? If it is, that's gambling.
That's that. I guess that is a fairly clear line to draw. But then do you incorporate anything? There's going to be mechanics involving cryptocurrency, and then is that the same? And then if something is of worth, but it does also raise an interesting discussion around the evolution of Twitch, and obviously Twitch is originated in game streaming and games audiences, but actually you get a lot more than just video games on Twitch, and you get not only just the conversational side of things, but also arts and crafts and cosplay, and any like Twitch isn't exclusively for gaming, and arguably live streaming is still a very young sector and industry. So, and yes, these activities aren't video games per se, but then is Twitch limited to just video games? No, it isn't.
Yeah, I think anything with user-generated content eventually gets to this point, doesn't it, where it's so big that it's like, how do we police this effectively? And Meta deals with this on Facebook and those sorts of things as well. It's definitely a challenge. Twitch is currently under a variety of scrutiny, I guess you could say, because there's a lot of things happening at the minute. They're changing up their revenue split for high-level streamers in the near future as well, which you can read about on the internet. And there's also an interesting article on Bloomberg if you are curious about moderation in general and about young people coming to harm on Twitch. There's a really good piece of investigative reporting about predators finding children on the app as well, which obviously they have to take as many steps as possible to reduce. If you like any of the news that you've heard today, or if you want to hear more from myself, from Dan, from anybody else on the Play team who feels like writing something tomorrow, we do a weekly blog called the Etch Play Weekly Roundup, and it features our views and things that have been happening in the games industry, and also sometimes just thoughts about the games that we've been playing. There'll be one of those tomorrow. There's one every Friday usually when there's no big world news. So you can check that out tomorrow if you're interested. It's over at etchuk.com/play. And yeah, we would love you to check it out and let us know what you think. We're going to switch to some gameplay now. This is Tyre B on the live show. Not live technically, but she's playing Backpack Hero. And we'll be back in just about 5 minutes or so to talk about leaks and marketing and all those sorts of things. See you soon.
Hello and welcome to the Etch Play show, or our YouTube, depending where you're watching this video. I am Tyre and I am going to be playing some Backpack Hero, a game that I'm very excited to try out. This is the demo, so I guess we'll see how much gameplay there is in this one, but I saw someone play it on YouTube and it just looked like exactly my kind of thing. You play as a mouse or a rat, not really sure, and you go through dungeons, and the whole premise of the game is all about managing your backpack and the space in it, and it'll make more sense once we start. I love any kind of chore game that Adam probably would hate, but I'm super excited, so let's have a look. So we must conquer the dungeon by delving deep to the centre to discover the ancient cheeses hidden there. You are armed only with your magic backpack. I am so ready. Heading into the dungeon, knowing very few make it back alive. Ooh. So we need to go here, which gives us a chest of valuables. Lovely. So we've got a sword. Lovely. We have got a shield, also lovely, and we have a meal to add some energy. So now we've got all of our items in our backpack. You'll see that there's a limited number of squares, and that's where the gameplay really comes in, where there'll be some decisions about what to keep, and the placement of items is going to become really, really important later on. So let's see what we can do with this. And we're going to go and we're going to fight a small rat wolf. So in combat, you click on the enemy and you click on whatever you want to use. So I can see that this enemy is about to add some block. 32 health, so I just want to hit him a few times with my sword before he adds the block. You can see my action points here. This uses 1 action point and deals 7 damage. So that looks good. I don't have any action points left. And turn. Lovely. So now I can see he is shielded up and he's going to do 8 damage to me. I don't have any shielding, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to add 7 block to me using my shield. I think 1 damage probably isn't going to hurt me too badly, so let's go 1, 2 with the rest of our action points. And you can see he's going to shield up again, but he only has 9 hit points left, and my sword does 7 damage. So if I do 1, 2, I win, and I get a level up. Okay, so if I level up, I get to choose some spaces. Let's have some on the left. Why not? I can see my backpack is growing, which is very exciting. Oh, I could choose another space. Let's have this one here. And he dropped some items, so now this is the big question. I have my backpack, I have my spaces, and I have a bunch of different items that I can pick, but I can only take 3. So what do we have here? We have a damaged knife, only has 3 uses on it, but it does deal 8 damage, but it will get destroyed after 3 uses, which I don't think I'll like that. We have a machete that can only be used 1 time per turn. Does deal AoE damage. We have the double halberd, I think you say. So it does deal 4 damage to all enemies, but if it's next to any weapon, then it doesn't get as much damage. And this is where your spacing becomes very important. So looking at my space, I probably don't want the double halberd because it takes quite a lot of space up. But there is a bronze breastplate which could add 2 block to my character, which will always be there, and any adjacent diagonal, oh my god, it's like Diagonal Alley all over again. Armor will get a couple of blocks, and it also give my weapons extra damage. Now I'm looking at my setup, and I don't think, unless we drop something, I think we're going to struggle to fit both my shield and my armor. Add a spike stuff. So I know spikes are a very powerful build, so I probably do want to get my rose on. And this is a magical accessory, and there's some gold. So I definitely want the gold. So that will go in here. Now, do I want to get rid of a meal? Make space for my bronze bracelet. I think I do. I think I do. So if I do this, I'll pop this in here. What that does now is adding an extra bit of damage to my sword. And then I'm going to take a rose and add a little bit of spike to my character.
Hey, welcome back. You're watching the Etch Play Weekly live show with me, your host, Adam Burt, and my guest this week, Dan Thomas. That was some footage of Tyre playing Backpack Hero. If you like the look of that footage, you can actually watch even more of it over on our YouTube channel after the show. I think it literally goes live at 4:30. That's usually when things go up. But I think we've got like 20 minutes of footage of that up there if you want to watch the whole thing. But we're back, and we're going to be talking about leaks, which are obviously a big topic of conversation this week for a variety of reasons, but mostly Grand Theft Auto related. Grand Theft Auto 6 revealed unexpectedly by a hack of Rockstar Games. And Dan, you've got some thoughts about leaks to share with us, don't you? Some thoughts about how publishers and studios might react to leaks and how you would potentially, go about responding to it in public. Do you want to start us off?
Yeah, for sure. So obviously there's been a lot of dialogue and discourse on this thanks to the GTA 6 leak. And I think what's perhaps particularly, this is kind of peak leak, if you like. This is probably the most anticipated release for the coming maybe even decade if we go by GTA 5's kind of longevity. And it's also, as you mentioned when we were talking about it on the news earlier, it is still a long way off. We don't even, we'd have no we don't even have a year estimate of when to expect GTA 6. We've had acknowledgement that it's in development, which was obviously shocking to absolutely no one. That's as much as Rockstar have said on it, other than we'll share more in line with our communications plan. Was kind of like all that was said. We're working on it and we'll share more in due course. And we've not really had any other updates. And now all of a sudden there's 90 minutes of gameplay out in the wild, and yeah, super early. So it's interesting to think like what sort of impact this can have on a studio, a publisher, launch campaign plans and things like that. And I mean, yeah, from I guess our standpoint, the communications thing is where we jump to. There will have been, I doubt they've even finalised their launch planning and teaser reveals, announces, and all these kinds of things. So there are going to be marketing teams having to jump on this, rework things, not necessarily having to completely change their plans, because it's so far out, and the way the news cycle is, this will be not forgotten, but it will calm down, and you could still execute the same way. But you've also got to react to the current situation. And Rockstar have released a statement, as you said, confirming it is true, and that's obviously very disappointing for them. But that's all. Not only is that a lot of work that nobody was intending to do, it's going to be distracting resources, and that's going to be creating a lot of headaches for those teams. So yeah, our hearts go out to those who are having to deal with this. It's not really going to be, you don't land your dream job with your dream studio and then want to have to deal with this kind of thing. So there will be people that are having to struggle with that, and they are likely to having to be making comms plans changes. All right, so Alan, what do you think if you were in that kind of responsibility? Any thoughts on how you'd be approaching it?
I mean, it's interesting, isn't it? Because I think in consumers in general have become, over the last few years, even 5 years, a bit longer, more open and a little bit more savvy to the idea of game development for the most part. So like the kind of really dedicated consumers who are buying things on early access, for example, on Steam, are very happy to see things as a work in progress. You see stuff like EA showing off early looks at a Dead Space remake and just phrasing it in the right way so it lands people who are interested, following dev diaries early on. So there is almost like a sliver of hope that some people will be able to get away with sharing their game in an unfinished state and not suffer any kind of consequences. The problem for Rockstar, I think, is that GTA 6 is not one of those games. I think it's so high profile, I think it's so mainstream, that a lot of people who are seeing this footage are even less savvy than maybe some of the kind of biggest consumers of games. They're just everyday people who happen to like the Grand Theft Auto franchise, and they have a knee-jerk reaction to seeing it that's maybe not well informed. But also, I think there's just a level of expectation around a Grand Theft Auto game, even among people who are familiar with the industry. Expectations are so high, like Rockstar operate at such a high level that they really will struggle to develop it publicly, if that makes sense, like to have everyone see everything that's going on, to see features being developed that eventually get scrapped, or to see things that maybe don't work and they have to rejig them, and just the community's reaction to that would be really difficult. I was thinking about the kind of comparison of sorts that you can make in terms of thinking about high profile games. No game is as big as Grand Theft Auto, but a big game in recent years was Cyberpunk, and Cyberpunk had no significant leaks of this nature, but what they did suffer from was sharing footage of things that then didn't end up being in the final game. There was a lot of people who felt misled maybe by the way that Cyberpunk was marketed in terms of what actually came out at the end of it. There's all sorts of reasons for that. Game development is hard, things get cut, things have to change direction, you have to pivot at times. But it was difficult for them, having announced it so long ago, to have that long dev cycle of people asking more and more about it and saying little bits here and there. It was difficult for them to live up to those promises, which is what the community viewed them as, really, which is the difficult thing as well. So I think it's definitely possible to have a leak or to share early footage of something, but it has to be I think you have to be the right kind of game with the right kind of community, and I think it has to be really well phrased, because you can't show something that people get excited by and then be like, actually that's too hard, I can't do that. I'm doing something different instead, which is a very challenging situation to be in.
Yeah, it's that you touched on an interesting point, which is like the scale of this game, and yes, it is to a point where you couldn't. You couldn't be like, oh, here you go, community. What do you think? Here's some early access. You just wouldn't be able to process or digest that volume of feedback and appease that kind of number of opinions and whatever else. So it's kind of like, okay, so let's just not do it. But I guess the saving grace in this instance is also Grand Theft Auto, the franchise. I would stake is actually too big to fail at this point. Like it's
like
you said in the news,
the government's going to bail it out if it doesn't sound
well, there's like it's going to be, it's more, I think it's more disruptive to individuals and people who've got plans, and they had a certain way that they were going to reveal certain things, and that's gone out the bag. But in 2, 3, 4, however long it is until we actually get the release of this, it's not like people aren't going to buy it in droves, it's not like they aren't going to create an incredible hype campaign around it. So yeah, I mean it sucks, but it's certainly not devastating for an organisation as big as Rockstar or Take-Two. But yeah, it's just I guess it's an unwelcome distraction and frustration that they're going to have to deal with in the immediate term. And one aspect that they are going to have to deal with, and they are dealing with very effectively, and is the legal side of this. Their legal team could have been fired up, and again, it's not a problem when you're one of the biggest gaming franchises in the world, but that's not going to be a cheap process of all these takedown notices and serving and all these kind of the legal implications. But again, a privilege of being such an entity is they've got that resource probably in-house, ready to go, and they would have a practice, whereas maybe smaller devs perhaps wouldn't have that opportunity. So yeah, that's perhaps something kind of that's of merit for being that size, and maybe a warning shot to other devs who maybe are trying to decide, do we do some open development, and what are the ramifications? Well, one of them is you're going to have to do a lot. I mean, they've done a really good job of taking down this footage. It is out there.
They did it as well as you can do.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So your average, I guess, casual internet surfer is going to struggle to find it with a couple of Google searches. Your dedicated enthusiast would be able to. But yeah, that's another impact and ramification to be considered. What would we do if? So there's a lot of studios and publishers and games organizations don't necessarily have the legal arm strength of Rockstar. Another impact that has been discussed, I thought was interesting, is the impact on work flexibility. So we've all seen a shift in the way the modern world of office-based work is done, and there's been, particularly in the games industry, an embracing of remote to varying degrees. There's certainly a swathe of back to the office, and arguably this could be seen as an argument for, okay, we need tighter controls. That's easier to do in a physical location with physical security that we can manage, machines in a known location. So there is there's a potential, and I'm not up to speed on what the working practices at Rockstar are or were, but it would be a valid argument for those in charge to say, okay, no, any work on this game is going to be done in the building, and a lot tighter controls, which the counter argument to that, whilst that would improve security and control over these things, as we know, there will be an impact on productivity. The more gates and barriers to just getting your work done, sharing a build or showing somebody something to get their feedback, with the more hoops and hurdles that you've got to get through, you're going to be slowing down. And on a multi-year development, that adds up. So yeah, there's a counterbalance there. And any thoughts on the working processes?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting, isn't it? Because I mean, in Rockstar's case, they've said that there's going to be no material delay, which I think is a really interesting thing for them to publicly say about a game that has no release date. Because really, that could be a lie. They could absolutely affect the speed at which this game gets developed, but we don't know when it's supposed to come out, and they could just move it back if they wanted to. You know, so it's kind of like putting a brave face on it. But I would be surprised, and I think most people would be surprised if they do make big changes to the security policies, whether they encourage more local work or not. I personally would expect there to be some impact on the timeline. I can't see how you would find the time in an already probably very slightly crunchy, dare I say it, schedule to fit that kind of stuff in, to make everything take 5% longer. And yeah, I mean, the other thing that might be an issue, although Rockstar themselves have a pretty good defense against this by being basically the biggest games company in the world, everyone wants to work for. It's like a dream destination, it's a dream employer for a lot of people. But a lot of people, if they were told by a company, hey, you've been remote and we're not allowing that anymore, that would be untenable. There'd be some people who just don't want to go back to the office and they care enough about it that they wouldn't go back. They would switch jobs. But there's also people who just wouldn't be able to. They might be remote, like really far away. They're like, well, I can't move my life there, so I have to leave. And on a grand scale, a medium-sized company, that could contribute to quite a significant brain drain of like a lot of key staff leaving, which also has a big impact on your ability to deliver a good product and a timely product. So I think, you're right in all kind of cases. Like, it's almost like it's the biggest leak that could possibly happen, but also it's the company that are probably best equipped to deal with it in a variety of ways. They've got the legal team, they can handle all that. They've probably got more lawyers than some small countries. They've got dream employer status to the point where they probably will be able to retain most of their staff, even if they did become draconian. I think a lot of people see it as like where are you going to go from Rockstar? If you're an ambitious person, it's probably one of the biggest gigs you could have in games. So that will work in their favour as well. And my personal opinion about the timeline is that it will shift. This game will come out later than they were intending it to, but we just don't know when that would have been. And they can get away with that as well because they're so secretive about release dates. They didn't tell us one in the first place. It's kind of, I think it will all come out in the wash for them, and they'll be absolutely fine. Like you say, but definitely other companies in this situation would maybe be more troubled, shall we say, by this kind of development.
Yeah, like I say, it's kind of like if it's going to happen to anyone, maybe this is the ideal test case for everyone else to look at and learn from. Although obviously it's not a great thing to happen.
I think there's also, just to mention about we talked a little bit about the footage and the reaction to the footage. It's also been quite nice. I think someone on Twitter said this, so I'm just going to paraphrase them and massacre what they said and say it in a worse way. But it's nice to see how actually the game dev community has almost rallied around Rockstar a little bit and been like, well, here's what our game looked like when we were making it. I saw someone put it as it's like Rockstar got pantsed and now every other company is mooning in solidarity with Rockstar, showing off the ugliest builds of their game, like the most low poly, disgusting looking, like paper prototypes in some case I saw. And actually that's quite a nice outcome, that there's been this almost togetherness from the dev community around the world of being like, we see what happened to you and it sucks for you, but maybe this does lead to a world in which more people are savvy or don't have the kind of naivety that they have now about how game dev operates and how games are really built.
Yeah, absolutely, and that's perhaps a bit of a throwback to a show we had a few weeks ago. We talked about trend jacking, and there's now definitely a trend along these lines of studios and creating meme type content and funny videos and other devs, content creators. They're kind of all jumping on this, which actually is kind of helping drown out the the negativity. And if you're trying to find GTA leaks, well, now you've got a needle in a haystack, because there's a lot of other relevant content out there.
Yeah.
So another point that I haven't seen discussed as much, which we've talked about before, and this is more from a case study perspective, because I don't think, again, the scale and size of Rockstar doesn't make this a legitimate thing, but the leak originated on a website called GTA Forums. So that was the original posting, which is a fan community.
Right.
And we have a lot of conversations with our clients about kind of like, it's become more and more accepted and kind of the default that you want to nurture your own community, and community management has become a much more kind of day one role within a new studio setup. But we also talk about this idea that your community is going to happen one way or another, whether you intend it for it or not, whether it's something you want and you want to control, or you're just going to let somebody else deal with it. It will happen. And GTA Forums, being a part of something called GTA Network, is completely independent of Rockstar. Maybe if at and it's been around for years, so I guess why this isn't really a valid lesson for Rockstar to learn, but for somebody starting up a new studio or something, like actually creating the go-to place for your game in your community and having control over it, you've got a much more immediate opportunity to shut that down or be on top of it, rather than having to call in your legal team, who are going to have to contact that third party's legal team and so on and so forth. I say there's a point at which you can't control these things, but there's definitely a lesson there to consider what would happen if, and where would it happen. So do we own our subreddit? Do we own our Discord, or the most popular go-to Discord? Do we own the go-to forum for our game? And what sort of controls do we have in these kind of circumstances?
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? Because I guess, like, as a trend in general, and this is a long-term trend, not a recent trend, but we've really kind of seen the degradation of things like forums about specific topics and which people have become more niche, really, as like things like Twitter have become more popular, and they've almost become, for many companies, a bit of an afterthought. And obviously Discord isn't. Discord is very popular right now. But there is a good point there, I think, about just understanding your community and where they are. I do think, yeah, you said this as well, basically, but like some games are so big that they don't have one community. They effectively have lots in lots of places, and it would be impossible to gather them up like Infinity Stones and have them in the palm of your hand, because they're just uncontrollable. And I think GTA is definitely that kind of game. There's that's being discussed probably under every rock in every corner of the planet in one way or another. But yeah, it's a good point, definitely, to consider the kind of the channels that are available to people, and ultimately what we're really talking about. Leaking is, the kind of metaphor there is that water's coming out of a pipe, and the pipe that it's coming out of is really your message, or the kind of messaging that you're trying to shape, and the twists and turns that you want to portray as you move towards a reveal or a release or whatever it is that you're working towards. And there's definitely, that's the whole ball game, basically, really, isn't it? To think about, okay, here's our plan. How much of the plan do we control? How much do we measure? How much do we monitor? And what can we do if it goes wrong? Because actually, there's lots of ways that those plans can go wrong. A leak is one way, and Grand Theft Auto having this will, I'm sure, impact some plan, some way, somehow. But you also think about things like just sheer fan reaction sometimes, like the first gameplay footage of Halo Infinite that everyone basically clowned on the internet. It was probably almost as bad for them as a leak. Like, they were like, this is awful for us. Like, people really hate it. We're going to have to do a lot of work to change this, or to, we know what the kind of journey that game's been on since. But there's always a chance, that a message won't land in the way you want it to. It'll get out early, or it'll get out but be misinterpreted, or it'll get out or not be appreciated. So you've always got to, I think, have that flexibility or awareness to be able to pivot and change and go in different directions to keep people happy. And that's an art in itself, isn't it? There's whole teams of people who work on stuff like that. Absolutely.
And I guess we kind of touched on a few points, and I thought I'd maybe try and summarise by looking at the positives that we can take from this. And an overwhelming positive is the hype that they've got arguably for free as a result of this. So according to fan census, over 17, this was in the first few days, so this is old data already. I think this is as of the 20th, so a couple of days ago there were already over 1,700 articles across 600 different websites talking about GTA 6. GTA 6 was the most viewed title on YouTube after Fortnite, so there were Fortnite videos and then GTA 6 videos, with some, I think, 22 million views on official kind of measures, or some insane amount of coverage for again for free. More tweets since the leak than any other game. So they are getting some really good indicators that people are interested, and people always kind of speculate, maybe this was an intentional leak and things like that. I don't think anybody's thinking that in this instance. But to your point about like Halo Infinite, maybe there are scenarios where actually you've got plausible deniability when it's leaked rather than a showcase, so hype is definitely an interesting one. We talked about it already, kind of the trend jacking and the solidarity from creators and fellow devs and things like that. That's been a real positive that's come out of this, and given other studios a chance to put themselves in the limelight as well. Some clever marketing and kind of community and social posts and things like that. It's giving smaller devs a chance to, content managers and social media managers always looking for some inspiration for some new content. So that's I'm sure they're very grateful for this little bump in the news cycle. And also, as you were mentioning, this idea of early feedback. So if there were some things in there that the fans are reacting to that maybe the studio weren't so sure about, well, they're certainly going to be inundated with opinion now. Again, I think in this instance they probably on top of it, but if we're looking for silver linings, and as we've been covering all of this, what a great case study for other devs that we get to look and learn from. And maybe we've got a little bit more evidence now of what if this does leak. We've got something we can look to go, okay, well, what happened in this scenario? How was it handled? What was the impact? Things like that. So that's my kind of summary of looking for the silver lining of this. Anything else you want to add, Adam?
Nope, not at all. I think you've ended it perfectly. For those of you at home who enjoy the show, we are here every week at 4 p.m. BST, at least in the summertime. And then it's GMT during the winter. That's how time zones work. But we'll be back next week. And actually, Dan, I'm going to put you on the spot because you are back here next week. You're hosting next week. What can folks at home look forward to in next week's episode?
Well, they can definitely look forward to the week's games industry news, and there'll most likely be some gameplay of some sort, and I'm sure there'll be a discussion or a featured topic that we'll talk about. I wouldn't want to leak what that is at this early juncture, and nothing to do with the fact that it's not planned.
I'm going to leak it. Next week, follow me on Twitter. You see my Twitter handle's down there. I will leak the show details before Dan shares them publicly.
Wow, that's shameless.
You can tell him how terrible it looks because it's not finished yet. Like I say, we are back. You can get notified about that if you follow us here on Twitch. If that's where you're watching right now, there's a purple button somewhere down there. You can click that to follow us and get notified every time we go live, including with this fabulous live show. You can also watch us on YouTube. You might be doing that right now. But if you are watching on YouTube or you want to, make sure you subscribe to our channel on there, and you get all sorts of video content, including catch up with the live show, gameplay footage, extended gameplay footage as well, such as Backpack Hero played by Tyre today, and lots of other things as well. And we'll see you next week at about 4 p.m. Take care.